It was in 2009. I broke my leg. And an incident, actually, it was right in the middle of recording Twilight's second full-length album, Monument to Time End. I walked into a grocery store across the street from the studio we were recording at one evening to just go buy some cigarettes and something to eat, and I slipped and fell. There was a flower display that had been watered recently and was leaking. There was no caution signs or anything like that. I didn't see the water, and I slipped and broke my leg, and I was given a pain pill prescription for my injuries, which is, common. But in the United States, especially these days, I'm sure it might be true worldwide, there's a massive heroin epidemic. And they say that somewhere between like 80 and 90% of the cases of people in their 20s and early 30s who are using heroin, it's the result of an accident that was treated with opioid pain medication. Doctors were just passing it out like it was no big deal. And these medicines have become very strong. Oxycontin in particular that's what I was given for my broken leg. And I always stayed away from opiate related drugs when I was, engaging in recreational drug use prior to this accident my entire life, because I knew that I have an addictive personality, and I know I like drugs. And I was getting away with doing all the cocaine and the drinking and partying and stuff. It wasn't costing me every penny I had. I didn't have to do it every day. I wasn't physically addicted. It was a bad habit, but it wasn't ruining my life, and it didn't control me physically and mentally. And I always stayed away from opiates because I knew that they would be the ones to get me. It's heroin is the granddaddy of all drugs, and it's killed so many people, and it's just ruined lives. Like it's pretty much a guarantee that if you start messing around with heroin, that it's not going to end well. You're either going to die, you're going to wind up in prison, either for a possession charge or for doing some kind of criminal activity as a means to obtain money to support your heroin habit, or you're just going to live a life of absolute destitution and misery. And the latter is what wound up happening to me. Like I was saying, I always avoided those types of drugs. I mean, I wouldn't even mess around with the lighter pain medications, something like Vicodin, which is, like a Tylenol that has a little bit of opioid medication in it, but it's not as strong as some of the more serious painkillers like that are given to people when they, for example, break a large bone in their body. Like I didn't have surgery and everything. I legitimately needed that pain medicine. But I was on it for about 3.5 months, and the doctor was happy to refill my prescription, 2 weeks before he was supposed to, knowing damn well that I was at home eating way more of them than I should have been. And he was unaware of the fact that I'm an addict. And I became severely addicted to those pills. And as soon as they were gone, I started buying the pills illegally and began injecting them with a needle. This was all in like early 2010, right around the time we recorded Addict, ironically. That album was kind of prophetic, the reason that album is themed the way it is, and that the lyrical content is what it is. Although Chris Black, our producer, wrote the majority of the lyrics for that, I always sat down with him and talked to him about what I wanted the songs to be about. And then also sometimes he would just come to me with an idea for a song, and he would tell me straight up as my friend, he'd go, these lyrics are about what you're doing to yourself. He's like, and it's very strange. Chris wrote lyrics for Nachtmystium that almost like prophesized my future on a number of occasions. That song, Every Last Drop, that the story told in the lyrics of that song became my reality 3 years later. The part where I can't hold myself in this like victim stance kind of look at it is the fact I had many opportunities to get help before I got help. Century Media actually paid to send me to rehab in Los Angeles, California in 2011, and hooked me up with a program in the United States called Music Cares, which is a foundation that's been established by very like real rock stars, people like Eric Clapton. I know Courtney Love is involved and donates certain percentages of Kurt Cobain's royalties to this day to this foundation. Slash from Guns N' Roses. Scott Weiland, when he was clean, he was an active part of it, etc. And they throw big galas a couple times a year out in Los Angeles that are fundraisers for for this fund, which it's basically a bank account that is managed by a handful of people in New York, Nashville, and Los Angeles, which are the three music epicenters of the United States. So back to Music Cares. Century Media was aware of this foundation and suggested that I call them. They in cahoots with Century Media, they pulled together $40,000, and they paid for me to fly to Los Angeles on 24 hours notice. But they wanted me to go right away. They didn't want to give me time to think about it too much or decide I don't want to go, because confronting heroin addiction, like, you're going to go through detox, and it's extremely unpleasant. That's part of why people don't stop. You get physically ill in a way that is, I would rather have the worst flu or you know, any kind of like natural sickness that I've endured in my life. Then the thing you could compare it to the most, I think, would be a really horrible flu, with vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, sweating, hot, cold. So you have all that going on. And then on top of it, you cannot sleep. And that lasts, in me, it used to last 25, 30 days. I went on tour once for 40 days and kicked a heroin habit raw, going over there, like, with nothing to help me deal with the withdrawals. And I did not sleep the entire time I was there. Not once. I was awake for a month and a half from going through withdrawal. It was terrible. The other sickness doesn't last that long, but for me, the not being able to sleep, that was what always brought me back to the drug after a tour where I had stopped using, or after rehab or whatever. It was just this really horrible thing. And it's difficult. So anyways, I went to Los Angeles. This was all paid for me. The record label was looking out for me. A lot of people will turn their backs on somebody when they hear they have a heroin problem. And here I had my record company, well aware of what was going on, offering to help me and manage to get me not only into a drug rehab, but a very, very comfortable, exclusive drug rehab that's kind of made for people who are professional artists in some form or another, be it actors or musicians or whatever. And, you know, who gets that? You know, most people aren't so lucky. And here I am. I go out there, and I stayed there for 2 weeks, and I got through my detox. I wasn't sleeping, but I wasn't sick anymore. And I just wasn't done. I'm realizing now. You know, I told myself and everybody else, I got this. I'm good. I don't want to use. I'm fine. I want to go home. But in the back of my mind, I knew, you know, fuck this. Why would I stop? I basically became a person who didn't exist, who was like this character that was walking around in my body that allowed me to not have to confront who I really am to myself. And at the time, like, I wouldn't have, if you worded that to me in the exact words I just used to tell you that 5 years ago, I wouldn't have even understood what you were saying. And then I would have gotten upset and been like, what are you trying to say? Like, who I am right here is not me? Be like, this is what I've wanted to be my whole life, which was true. But what I wanted to be my whole life was anybody but myself. I wanted to be somebody who was above everybody around me as much as possible. I happened to be, I was into black metal. I was involved in the metal scene. So I wanted to be at the top of it. I wanted to be at the top of the food chain so that I wasn't as vulnerable to people. I wasn't as likely to become a target, you know? There's a reason, like, you may have noticed back in the Instinct Decay and Assassins days, I was a little overweight. As soon as I got onto Century Media, though, dude, and by the time Addicts came out, I was super skinny. I've been super skinny ever since. That has nothing to do with some change in my genetics. It had everything to do with vanity. Had to do with I want to you know, be more of a rock star or whatever. It was so sick, man. It was really fucked up. And also, like, if I was a quote unquote like rock star in my mind, it made it my divine right to be all fucked up on drugs. That's a rock star's divine right, is to be a fucking drug addict, you know, all fucked up in the corner of his dressing room. Like, that's what you want your fan to walk in on. You don't want your fans to walk in and find you on your laptop Skyping with your wife and kids, drinking a soda before your show. That's not very rock and roll, right? No, you wanted to walk in and see the pile of cocaine and the empty fucking broken whiskey bottle and the needle hanging out of your arm and you know, people waking you up to get you on stage and then go on stage and put on a kick-ass show. And like, I did that, man. You know, I fucking almost overdosed in Houston, Texas, like literally 20 minutes before we played on the Cradle of Filth tour. Somehow I scored heroin on the road, which was really hard to do. It's not a very social drug. It's not like the cool thing to ask people about at a concert, I found out. You can ask for cocaine and weed and stuff, but you start asking people about heroin and they look at you like you're a fucking terrorist or something. Like, what? Like, get away from me, man. Like, gross, you know? So, of course, because I don't want to have that conversation with anybody, I made the guy selling our t-shirts. That was his job. I said, you have 2 jobs on this tour. Your first job is to find me heroin at any possible juncture. Your second job is to sell t-shirts. Like, but primarily, like, I want you asking anyone that looks like they might have a drug problem if they can get me dope. And by some chance, he got it for me in Houston that night, and he got me a whole bunch of it. And I had no idea how potent it was or anything, because with heroin, you can look at it. It can look the same as some other heroin that you bought from someone else, could look like the exact same shit. And one is 100 times more powerful than the other. You cannot tell from looking at it. It's not like marijuana or cocaine where you can get a pretty good idea from smelling it or tasting it or whatever. Heroin's not like that. So I just took this shit in the bathroom, and I hadn't used in a couple of weeks. I was really excited. Immediately that became more important than anything, including my show. I didn't even consider the possibility that my tolerance is down and I might overdose. You know, I was right near Mexico, so the chances are that it had just come across the border and probably hadn't been cut very much and was probably very pure compared to what I was used to way up north. And that's exactly what happened, man. I just did a whole shitload of it all at once, and Sanford came into the bathroom of the dressing room and found me passed out on the wall turning blue with a needle hanging out of my arm, and had to like throw water on me, like cold water, and slap the shit out of me a bunch of times to wake me up, you know. So that moment, you know, like, dude, I told that story, I can't tell you how many times, probably starting that night to people, like it was cool. You know, and I thought it was cool. I still kind of think it's cool. That's rock and roll as fuck. Like, and we went on stage and played a great show, but it's not healthy. You know, just because it's rock and roll. Like, Lemmy was a methamphetamine addict. That's not cool, but it was cool that he did it his whole life and lived like Lemmy, because he's fucking Lemmy. The guys who have left the biggest marks on history are people who have died in bathtubs of drug overdoses in foreign countries, or strange hotel rooms in God knows where, or, you know, killed their girlfriend and then overdosed and died, like Sid Vicious, or fucking Kurt Cobain blew his brains out after he shot a bunch of heroin, even though he was a millionaire and had a wife and a new kid. Like, these stories don't end well. Like, and those are the people who made the music that is considered to be the most legendary in the genre of rock and roll. So why the hell wouldn't I want to, like, if I was going to die while I was making Nachtmystium music, I absolutely wanted to make sure that if it wasn't like my tour bus rolling over on me, like Cliff Burton style, I would much rather know that I died backstage in my dressing room shooting heroin 20 minutes before I was supposed to play to 1,000 people. You got to understand, man, I was in high school when I started Nachtmystium. I was 17 years old, barely 17 years old. And before I was out of high school, I had albums out internationally, you know, on small labels, but I had records out in Germany and the United States, and on very, you know, cult labels, working with Somber Records and Paniac and all those labels back in the day with bands like Moonblood and Catharsis and Death Spell Omega. Like, for a kid, I was in a really, really weird spot, you know? And it just kept ascending from there. So I had never had to like get a real job or anything, or really deal with any kind of consequences for any of my actions in my life ever, in my personal life or elsewhere, you know. And this was becoming very real to me that this was going on, and I was still addicted to heroin. So you already are on a drug that makes you deny reality, and then you see your world, your very, very, very fragile, specific to you world, collapsing around you in front of your very eyes, knowing damn well you're responsible for it, and you're still on heroin. Any doctor will tell you, yes, that heroin addict went and dove even further into his addiction and probably did everything he could or she could to fall off the face of the earth, which is exactly what I did. And I wound up homeless. In 6 months, I went from living in a high-rise apartment on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, which is some of the most expensive real estate in the city of Chicago, which isn't cheap to begin with. And 6 months later, I was literally on the street with nowhere to go, had lost all of my belongings, most of my clothing, had a couple of bags, and was staying at a homeless shelter at night, getting in a line with 100, 200 other guys to sleep in a big, hot room together in bunk beds from 10 at night until 5 in the morning, only to be woken up to someone flipping on a very bright fluorescent light, yelling, "Get up, get your breakfast, you have to be out by 6," and then having nowhere to go all day and figure out how I'm going to afford my drug habit, which cost me at the time, I could really only pull together maybe $20 or $30 a day. My whole day was spent doing that. I didn't consider buying food. I didn't consider trying to figure out a living situation. I didn't reach out for public aid, which does exist for people that are homeless and stuff. If you really want to get off the street, there's organizations and establishments throughout the city of Chicago, especially a big city like Chicago, that will help you with that. And all you have to do is show up and talk to them. And then if they tell you to come back, you have to show up whenever they ask you to come back. You just got to be there. That's it. And I couldn't even do that for myself. I could not do that for myself. And all I could do was worry about how am I going to hustle up enough money to get myself high today and buy some cigarettes. Those two things were priority number one over anything. And I just didn't care anymore. I had to live on those streets like that after being completely ridiculously spoiled by circumstance my entire adult life. I went from being a teenager to being a musician that was living off of it immediately and never had to work for anything really. You know, sure, I worked hard on Nachtmystium. I dedicated a ton of time to it and was very, very driven. And but it never felt like work because that was my passion. That was my favorite thing in the world to do. Like the hardest part about it, whatever that was at whatever point in time, still I would rather have been doing that than anything else. And I'm really lucky to have had that opportunity. And it's really disgusting that I let something grab a hold of me that I knew damn well was going to destroy me eventually. And I had so many opportunities to get better. I had so many opportunities to confront it, but I was just convinced that I was special or something, that, or that, you know, I would never face consequences. You know, it wasn't entirely the fault of my drug addiction. You know, there was just a part of me that was just I'm just a very self-centered person. I try to not be that way today. I work really hard on it, but I'm very aware of it being my nature. You know, Neil from Krieg wrote a really scathing story about being my friend that Vice published. You may have read online. Now I will say this: 30 to 40% of what is in that article is not true. He didn't need to say the things that weren't true or fabricate the things the way he did, and only he and I will ever know what's really true in there. And I don't think anybody would ever believe me saying, "Oh, of course he would want to deny that." He made up some stuff that just straight up didn't happen, and I don't understand why he did, because the things that did happen, that he did mention, are terrible enough that he didn't need to exaggerate. But in a weird way, Neil, who was my best friend for 12 years, Neil kind of saved my life by writing that. All the shit that I read strangers saying about me online, you know, they were just like the people I stole money from online. They're an email address. They're a name on a screen. They're not a real person, which is why I was able to do what I did to the fans. You know, I could never take money from a fan that was standing right in front of me, much like I've never shoplifted. I can't steal even from a business, you know, like a big corporate business. I don't steal from, I wouldn't steal from McDonald's just because I don't do that. I don't pick something up and take something that's not mine. I didn't do it as a kid. I didn't do it as an adult. I did not do it as a drug addict. I didn't do it when I was desperate, you know, but if you're just an email address, you're not really a person standing in front of me. I don't have to look you in your eyes and lie to you. And it's basically the most cowardly way to take from anybody. If you think about it, it's the easy way, and you don't have to, you know, have any memory of looking at that person or seeing them excited or seeing them disappointed. No, they're just an email address. And if you don't want to open their email, angry at you, you could just delete it like it doesn't exist. And it was never there, like that was how I operated. And it's so fucked up, man.